Far away in the cold stretch of the Orion Fringe, there was a lonely human outpost that lived in constant fear of creatures known as the Scourge. These were not simple beasts, they were merciless predators with claws like blades and eyes that burned. In the dark, the people of the outpost had learned to hide at the first sign of them, because anyone who stood in their path was torn apart in moments. In this distant region of space, a man named Daniel worked as an engineer on a slow and aging supply freighter. He was not a soldier and had never worn the uniform of any army. His work was fixing broken machines, patching wires, and keeping engines alive so the freighter could bring food, water, and medicine to isolated colonies. He liked quiet work and avoided trouble whenever he could, but trouble found him on a day when the sky outside the freighter was empty and the engines hummed steady. Without warning, a signal broke through the static of space communication. It was raw, desperate, and trembling, a woman's voice calling out for anyone to hear, saying they had taken her children, that they were gone, that someone please must help before it was too late. The message ended with a sound like breaking metal, and then silence, but the coordinates were burned into the ship's system. Daniel felt his heart tighten. The crew gathered around the console and read the data, and it was clear. The signal came from a region known to be the hunting ground of the Scourge. The captain's face hardened, and he said they would not go anywhere near that place, not for any reason. It was suicide to go there. But as the others walked away, Daniel kept staring at the coordinates over and over again, as if the numbers pulled at him like a chain. The thought of children alone in the dark among the Scourge gnawed at him like a living thing. He knew the freighter could not go, but maybe he could. He went to the armory, a small dusty room that smelled of oil and metal, and there under a cover he found an old combat exosuit built for heavy fighting, long forgotten by the crew. He touched the armor and felt the cold weight of it. Then, without speaking to anyone, he began to prepare, loading the suit with what ammunition it could hold, strapping the heavy blade to his back and sealing the cracked helmet over his head. He moved to the escape shuttle alone, his mind already fixed on the journey ahead. As the hatch closed and the engines roared, he set his course for the canyon where the Scourge hunted. His heart was heavy, but steady. His thoughts were only on reaching that voice before it was too late. The small shuttle carried Daniel through the emptiness of space toward the broken colony, and as the stars drifted past the window, he felt the slow rise of fear in his chest. But it did not turn him back. Instead, it sharpened his focus and kept his hands steady on the controls. When the colony finally sighted, it looked like a shadow of something that had once been alive. Buildings stood half collapsed, the ground burned in black streaks, and the air shimmered with heat from fires that had only just died. The shuttle landed on a cracked landing pad that groaned under its weight. Daniel stepped out, his boots striking the ground with a hollow sound. The air was heavy with smoke and the smell of scorched metal, and there was no sound of human life, only the far-off echo of something moving quickly in the distance. He followed the broken streets, scanning each corner, until he found a collapsed shelter, and from the dark opening a pair of frightened eyes stared back at him. Then the rest of her emerged, a woman with dust tangled in her hair and a deep cut on her arm. She was shaking, but her voice was steady when she said that her name was Lena and that her children had been taken alive into the canyon hive of the Scourge. She said no one who had entered that place had ever come back. She said there were hundreds of them down there, and even the strongest fighters had been torn apart before they could reach the deepest tunnels. Daniel listened without moving his eyes from hers, and when she finished, he told her that he would go and bring them back. She looked at the dents in his armor, the cracks in his helmet, and she knew he was no soldier. But there was something in his voice that made her believe him. Still, she told him he would face things in that hive that no human could survive. She pointed toward the jagged mouth of the canyon where the land dropped into darkness and the air seemed to breathe with a slow living hunger. Daniel tightened the straps on his armor, checked the ammunition on his suit, and began to walk toward that black opening. His steps were heavy, but sure, and Lena watched him until the shadows swallowed him, and he was gone into the depths, where light did not reach, and only the scourge ruled the air and the stone. The canyon swallowed Daniel in its cold breath, and the walls around him closed in like the ribs of some great beast. The light from his suit lamps stretched only a few steps ahead, and beyond that was a moving darkness that shifted and breathed as if alive. The ground under his boots was slick with strange fluids and littered with bones, human and alien, and the air was thick with the sharp smell of acid. His helmet picked up faint sounds far ahead, the soft scraping of claws on stone, the slow hiss of something waiting for him. He moved forward, and the tunnel widened into a chamber, glowing faintly from living walls that pulsed like veins in a body, and from those walls shapes began to pull themselves free. Slick black bodies with claws, curved like hooks and teeth that dripped green liquid. The first wave came fast and silent, forcing Daniel to bring up his rifle. The recoil shook through his arms, but he kept firing, the rounds tearing through alien flesh. The creatures fell, but more came in from every side, leaping from the walls and the ceiling until the air was a storm of teeth and claws. The suit AI counted each kill in a voice that stayed calm, even as the fight became a blur. 25, 40, 60. Daniel fought with a mix of fire and steel, switching to his heavy blade when the rifle overheated each swing, cutting deep through muscle and shell. His breathing grew heavy, and his arms burned, but he could not stop because every step forward brought him closer to the cries he thought he could almost hear in the deeper tunnels. He pushed through a narrow passage and came into another chamber, this one lit by pools of strange liquid that reflected his armored shape, and in the far shadows something far larger moved its head, scraping the ceiling, its eyes like burning coals staring at him. It was the Alpha Scourge, its body covered in thick bone armor, and its 6 blade arms moving with slow hunger. It let out a sound that shook the stone, and the other creatures drew back as if even they feared it. Daniel tightened his grip on the blade and stepped forward, knowing this was the heart of the hive, and that to reach the twins he would have to bring this monster down no matter what it cost. The Alpha Scourge moved with the slow weight of a predator that knew its strength, and each step it took sent a shiver through the stone under Daniel's feet. The air between them was thick with heat, and the sound of its breathing came like the deep grind of rock on rock. Daniel did not wait for it to strike first. He charged with the heavy blade raised high, and the Alpha swung one of its massive arms down in an arc meant to crush him. The blow met the blade in a flash of sparks, and the impact drove him to his knees, but he pushed upward, forcing the arm aside and cutting deep into the thick bone shell. The beast shrieked, and the sound echoed through the tunnels, calling smaller scourge to swarm into the chamber. Daniel spun his blade in a wide circle, taking down the first of them while keeping his eyes locked on the Alpha. The fight became a storm of movement, claws scraping across his armor, acid splashing against the visor, and his arms shaking from the force of each strike. His suit AI counted the kills in the background: 190, 250, 280. But the Alpha still stood, its armor cracked in several places, its movements growing sharper and faster as rage took hold. Daniel saw the massive roots that hung from the ceiling of the chamber, thick as pillars and pulsing with alien growth, and Crothan idea formed through the haze of exhaustion. He waited for the Alpha to rear back its arms, high, ready for a killing blow, and at that moment he swung his blade into the base of one of the roots, severing it in a spray of thick fluid. The root crashed down with the weight of stone, crushing 2 of the Alpha's legs and forcing it to stagger. Daniel roared with every ounce of strength left in him and drove forward the tip of his blade, finding the gap between bone plates and plunging deep into the beast's chest. The Alpha let out one last scream that shook the walls, then its body collapsed with a sound like breaking mountains. Daniel's breath came heavy, his suit covered in acid burns and his muscles trembling, but the sound he heard next cut through the chaos, 2 small voices calling weakly from the far side of the chamber. He stumbled toward them, finding the twins huddled behind a wall of broken stone, Their faces pale but their eyes alive, he lifted them into his arms, feeling their small weight against the battered armor, and turned toward the tunnels. Behind him, the sounds of collapsing stone told him the hive was dying, and he had little time to carry them out. The tunnels shook with the sound of falling stone as Daniel carried the twins against his chest, their small hands clutching at his armor and their faces buried against him to hide from the sights around them. The air was thick with dust, and the glow from the living walls faded as the hive began to die with the alpha gone. The scourge seemed to vanish into the cracks, retreating or collapsing with the hive itself. Daniel ran through the winding passages, his boots slipping on the wet ground, his breath loud in his helmet, and every step pounding through the pain in his legs and the burning cuts across his body. He could feel the weight of each scar being carved into him as the suit groaned with every movement, but he did not slow because he could see in his mind the image of a mother waiting in the cold air above the canyon, and he knew nothing mattered more than getting these children to her. The light ahead grew brighter until at last he burst from the mouth of the canyon into the pale light of dawn. The air outside was cold and clean, and the wind cut through the smoke that still hung over the broken colony. Lena was there, eyes wide and full of fear that turned to relief so fast it broke into tears. She ran to him and took the twins from his arms, holding them close as if she could never let go. Daniel stood unsteady, his armor cracked open in places, blood seeping into the dust, his body marked by burns and cuts that would never fade. Lena looked at him and saw not only the wounds but the truth that this man had stepped into the heart of death for children that were not his own. She tried to speak thanks, but her voice broke, and instead she knelt and placed her hand over his scarred arm, swearing that her life and the life of her children would belong to him, in debt and in loyalty for as long as they lived. She offered not gold or credits or any material thing, but a promise of family and protection, a bond stronger than any trade. And in that moment, Daniel felt something he had not felt in years. A place to belong. The scars no longer felt like a burden, but like a story written into his skin. A story of life saved and hope returned as the sun rose over the colony and the wind carried the first warm light across the horizon. Word of what had happened began to spread, and long after Daniel was gone, the people would still tell the tale of the human who stood against 300 monsters for the lives of 2 children and earned a reward beyond all measure. The end.